Gosh, I just burped really loudly. I wish that was caught on camera. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is more of an educational tool, info dump sort of situation and a little bit longer. So I've included timestamps down below in the description so you can fast forward as needed. This week I posted a reel on Instagram about safety tools and how I won't play at tables that don't implement some sort of communication system. And oh boy, do folks have opinions when the term safety tool comes up in relation to tabletop role-playing games. Some folks love them and use them at every table, even the ones they've been at for years. Some folks who are new to the hobby have no idea what they are. Others think that people who use them are... One moment, let me pull up my Instagram comment section. Woke snowflakes who are ruining their make-believe game about wizards and dragons. Okay, this is getting snarkier than it needs to be. Let's reframe the conversation. When the term safety tools comes up, a lot of gamers seem to check out of the conversation. When the concept of gaming and consent comes up, there seems to be a disconnect within the tabletop role-playing community.
I hate this channel.
I know I've already lost a good portion of folks who clicked on this video, but if you're still here, I think I have some great tools for you. Instead of thinking of them in terms of safety, let's reframe the conversation. What if I told you I had a way for you to near perfectly calibrate your next campaign to meet the expectations of your players? A way to remove all the guessing of what we do as game masters when we try to surprise and delight the players at our table. A surefire way for you to get feedback from your players in a way that feels natural and not like you're grasping at straws to read body language while folks stare blankly at you waiting for the next thing that happens in game. Sounds pretty great, huh? Like with anything else in gaming, I'm not here to tell you you have to use these to run a good game or have fun. Use these calibration tools or don't. That's up to you. But it's never a bad idea to be educated on all the tools that are available to a GM or to a player. Some folks are uncomfortable giving GMs feedback, even when it's anonymous, because they simply don't know what they want to ask for, or they're scared that they'll hurt their friends' feelings. Some are uncomfortable stating what they want out of a game when they're at a table full of folks they've never met before. Not everyone is raised with good examples of healthy and open communication, and implementing a lot of these can help folks develop those skills over time while they slay dragons and rescue a fair maiden in a far-off kingdom who turns out to be a hag in disguise that mortally wounded your father in front of you when you were a child, orphaning you and sending you on your path of revenge, ending in your... Sorry, I got lost in the sauce there for a minute. So, now that we're on the same page, let's get into what some of these tools are and see if you can implement any of them at your next table. Calibration tools in relation to TTRPGs is a term that encompasses many different tools meant to make the gaming experience more comfortable for everyone at the table, clearly defining what kind of game people are signing up for. At their core, they're communication techniques. They're not meant to be any sort of dictatorship or weapon to be wielded over others to poo-poo on someone else's fun, but they only work if the whole table buys into them. So implementing them should be something that everyone is on board with. Unlike video games, books, movies, and TV shows, tabletop role-playing games as an entertainment medium sits in a category all their own. TTRPG stories are made up in real time by GMs and players, so there's no synopsis of the game to read beforehand to know if this one's for you. These tools give players ways to share what they do and don't enjoy before a campaign starts, or even indicate their level of personal comfort with specific topics during gameplay. During this video, I'll be referencing the TTRPG Safety Toolkit, a free resource full of safety and calibration tools you can use in your game to enhance communication. I've linked a resource down below for anyone who wants to check it out or follow along with me as I reference examples. I'll also be talking about what's worked best for me and my tables from my own personal experience. As with anything else in gaming, you can use some, all, or none of the tools I'll be highlighting. If you use tools different from the ones I list, share them with me in the comments. I love hearing about this kind of stuff, and I'm always looking for ways to improve my own experience and the experience of my players. Now, with a quick and dirty definition of what calibration tools are under our belt and a resource handed out to the class, where do we start with these things? A session 0 can mean a lot of things for different tables. In my experience, session 0 is usually where a table is coming together for the first time to discuss the game and isn't tied to any actual gameplay. I've been running a Twitch channel that features TTRPGs for a few years now. I've adopted a session 0 outline that's used for all the games I run or showcase. I've linked it below if you'd like to follow along or use it as a template. That's a free resource to you. During the session 0, we introduce ourselves, talk about what's expected with everyone involved, what our boundaries or lines and veils are, game tools we'll be using like Roll20, Zoom, Video Ninja, and our character ideas for the game. Pretty standard stuff for most tables, I think. But what's this boundaries and lines stuff? That sounds kinky. Like I covered in our definition of safety tools, there's no overall synopsis we can look at for TTRPGs to determine if there's something we're comfortable experiencing, like movies and TV shows. Those come with rating systems and warnings for topics that could be personally upsetting for some folks and plot synopsises so we can scan ahead of time. Since we don't have that in TTRPGs, folks can do a bit of the legwork ahead of time by setting boundaries and their comfort levels, aka lines and veils, with different topics. This is especially important if everyone is sitting together for the first time and you've never met one another. There are so many types of games and styles of play out there. This might be the time a player decides a table isn't a right fit for their playstyle, or the DM might have a dark, gritty, bloody campaign in mind, but all the players want is something akin to Monty Python and Quest for the Holy Grail. To be honest, all of those are perfectly valid things. Here's an example of a lines and veils doc. This one was created by a friend of mine in Excel, and I've adapted it for my own use, taking bits and pieces of the different forms I've used over the years to create something that works for my games and my channel. Here we have a list of topics that, in general, some folks might find personally upsetting. And alongside these columns state the various degrees of comfort a player or GM might have with these topics being in the game in general or being directed at players. The varying degrees of comfort on this form mean green/okay, I'm comfortable with this. This is good for me. Orange, ask first. I'm okay with this, but if it's coming up as a theme, I'd like to be informed before encountering it. Yellow, veil. These things may exist in the world, but if they come up, we'll draw a curtain and fade to black. Red or line. These are hard limits, and content should not show up in this case. Before we get into examples of how these are used, I want to mention that your lines may look wildly different from table to table. People I've been playing with for years, I'm very comfortable with them, and I trust them to play through far darker stories than people I've just met at a convention or online. For those folks, this form is mostly green for me. However, just because I've been playing with someone for years doesn't mean I know what's going on inside their head. As much as I'd like to emulate Professor X from time to time, I'm not a mind reader. So I request a session 0 and a new set of lines and veils before every campaign. With our long-running streamed campaign, Nexus Adventures, we regularly feature guests for certain story arcs. Before each guest joins the table, we have a session 0 and discuss lines and veils and the playstyle of the table. Okay, on to examples of how this works. Let's go with the first topic on the list, alcoholism. Now, the tavern and drinking ale are pretty common occurrences in most fantasy settings and stories. But let's say, hypothetically, you have a player struggling with responsible alcohol use and they don't want a constant reminder in graphic detail that alcohol exists. They don't want to be going into detail about what's on tap at the local tavern or sitting through drinking games. They may choose to mark that as a veil reference only or as a full-on line if they do not want it at all. They might be comfortable with it being referenced in the game world in general, or they may not want to see it in the world at all. And that's not to say that it's not there, it's just not something that you have to focus on while they're at the table. For the most part, these lines and veils remain static throughout the campaign, but there may be instances where you do a check-in and they do change for the table, either permanently or for a short period of time. For instance, I experienced my first tornado while living in Nashville. One day the world was normal, the next a good chunk of my city was in pieces, scattered like a dollhouse across the floor. My 10-minute drive to work took 3 hours. My friends and coworkers lost their homes. Some of my friends working in bars were trapped in those establishments until rescue crews could come and clear the streets around them. For several months, tornadoes and similar weather events were a hard line for me. Even thunderstorms were making me anxious. As I got over that anxiety and moved on, that hard line is now green. Severe weather events in games don't bother me anymore. I can sleep straight through a thunderstorm without waking up in a cold sweat. It's okay to have that back there, and that just took a little bit of time. There's also a spot on this form to add things that aren't on the list already. Now, here's a great spot to say that you don't necessarily need something to be personally upsetting or not safe for work to add it to this list. For instance, say you're playing online with people across multiple time zones, as many of us do these days. If you're playing at odd hours that interrupt your normal eating schedule, you may ask to have food descriptions added as a veil or line because you struggle with paying attention as your stomach starts to growl when the DM gives a mouth-watering description of a royal feast. I've been there. That's a perfectly acceptable reason to ask for descriptions to be altered. It is all about the player's comfort, and you want them to be paying attention to your game and not thinking about what they're going to eat an hour from now. Moving to the other side of the dock, there's a specific section pertaining to romance. Some folks want the opportunity to form romantic bonds in game because they further anchor the character in that world and give them people in the world to fight for, and that's fine. Some people don't want to romance anyone, but they're fine with other players doing it. That's fine too.
I love you.
I know.
Some tables want no romance whatsoever. That's totally valid as well. When you get to this section, everyone's comfort level with relationships in the game should be discussed at the table so everyone knows where their limits are. Below this section, I have a list of themes that never appear in my games under any circumstances. These are the limits that I set for both what airs on my channel and for when I run games, so this form does double duty for me in that sense. Beneath that, concept, aim, and tone of the game can be documented, and I list the calibration tools I use for players so they know how I want them to indicate their level of comfort during gameplay. There are many ways players can indicate they're uncomfortable with something happening in a scene. The system I use is the XNO card system. You can find this system and others in greater detail in the TTRPG Safety Toolkit resource that I linked in the description. The TLDR is that this is a way for players to indicate their discomfort in a scene. A GM may choose to move on to the next scene right away, or stop the scene, take a break, and clarify with the uncomfortable player what they're feeling. All that is up to the individuals at the table how they handle these situations. I've even used it as a player to stop play and check that my actions are okay with the rest of the table before I proceed with play. What my character was about to do in this next clip could have royally screwed over my party, so out of respect for them, I just flat out asked if my actions were cool or not. To my party members, this is a what my character would do moment, but I'm not going to do it without y'all's permission because I don't believe in that. Jack's teleporter can teleport her to out of here with the stones. Do you want her to GTFO? Or do you want us all to play this out as a group?
I don't know. We don't want all of the stones being here.
Mm-hmm.
You have all 3 stones with you.
Exactly.
I'm okay with Jack taking the stones and GTFOing.
Okay. Luckily, as you see in the clip, my party was totally down with my plan, and it led to some fun storytelling for us later. Personally, I like the X card system because of how brief and easy it is, but it's important to clarify that the X card can mean different things to different tables. At mine, it means stop, move on, I'm uncomfortable. The N card is to signal we may be heading towards an X card for me, but I'm not quite sure. And the O card means I'm comfortable and consenting enthusiastically to everything that's happening at the table. There's even extensions and macros that folks have created for things like Roll20 and other tabletop simulators, so if you're playing online, you can still implement the system at your table. Now, this is all fine and dandy for gameplay, but how do I handle things post-game? Where are all those juicy feedback tools that I talked about? Long-term players of TTRPGs have probably experienced the post-session blues at one point or another. You have that one fantastic session. The roleplay is emotional and amazing. Your epic, nail-biting battle ends in victory, and you can finally breathe a sigh of relief. But unexpectedly, you feel sad. A bit blue. What's going on? Preface this, I am not a psychologist, but the term is commonly talked about in relation to calibration and safety tools, so it's important to know. Dropping is the emotional and physical effects of the release and drop of endorphins in the body after an intense experience. This quote comes from an article from Positively Mindful, linked below for further reading if you'd like. Maybe you're not feeling the effects of drop, but something in the session rubbed you the wrong way and you can't quite put your finger on it. Post-session care is important for these reasons. It's also a great time to check in with everyone and get some helpful feedback on the session, which is immensely helpful for game masters who are wanting to assemble the most enjoyable game they can for their players. So how do you get feedback and run a vibe check at the same time as a GM? My favorite way is to introduce the Stars and Wishes system to the table's post-game routine. With this system, everyone at the table gets a couple minutes to highlight what they enjoyed, their stars, and things that they'd like to see in the future sessions, their wishes. Now, this isn't a time to demand things be added or finger point, and much of the initial feedback given will be very surface level. But the beauty of this is that it builds trust amongst everyone at the table while creating a healthy and communicative environment. Those two things might be something players at your table don't have elsewhere. Everyone's life experience is different that way. As time goes on with the table, in my own personal experience with this system, people begin giving richer feedback to one another, with everything from expressing discomfort with certain interactions to asking more time be made for characters to revisit a certain conversation in the next session, or updating lines based on a new personal discovery about boundaries and personal feelings. After a while, you'll be amazed at how much folks open up to one another. I hope this helped explain calibration tools and their use in TTRPGs for you all. If you have any experience implementing these tools or others, please share them in the comments below. And as always, if you have any questions or want further clarification, you're more than welcome to leave those comments too. Big thanks to Dungeon Dad, Indestructible Boy, KriticalKae, and AlessaVampp for reading over this video before filming for some critical feedback. And thank you to everyone watching for hanging out with me today. And as always, happy adventuring.